The story of Three Kingdoms is mainly told by two writers, Shu, who based his book on the actual history, and Liu Guanzhong, who wrote The Romance of Three Kingdoms, which is a historical novel loosely based on the actual history. However, Shu's writing style was so dull and blunt that Pe Songji, a historian from the 5th century, added his comments and details regarding the Three Kingdoms period. And Liu Guanzhong's novel, written with more exaggeration and dramatic stories, is The Romance of Three Kingdoms that many people read today. Of course, since The Romance of Three Kingdoms is a novel, there are more dramatic and interesting elements, but I think I can find much more depth and meaning in actual history and events. So here I'm going to talk about Shu's version of Three Kingdoms. Without further ado, I'll start the story of the Three Kingdoms. There lived a eunuch called Shao Tang. Although Shao Tang was a eunuch, he had a good relationship even with his political opponents. In 146, he helped Emperor Huan to be crowned as the emperor, and eventually drove out political opponents and strengthened the rule of the emperor. In return, Shao Tang was allowed to adopt a son, which was unprecedented for a eunuch. He named the child Shao Song. Shao Song grew up to have a son of his own, whose name was Shao Shao. Afterwards, Shao Tang's influence and power were so great that even Zhang Yang, who was the head of the 10 attendants, had to attend to his needs. The 10 attendants were a group of influential court eunuchs. Shao Tang and the eunuchs gradually took control of the government and eliminated their opponents by imprisoning and executing hundreds of officials. Then, in 168, the Emperor Huan died and the 13-year-old Emperor Ling was crowned. The eunuchs continued their corrupt politics by controlling the emperor, and the most powerful and corrupt of them all were called the 10 attendants. Even now, the term 10 attendants is used to describe those who are extremely corrupt. The 10 attendants even sold public posts to the highest bidder. It's said that these officials were replaced by a person who had given them more bribes, so most officials couldn't keep their jobs for more than a year. For this reason, those who had taken office had to collect as much tax as possible in order to compensate for the bribe that he used to pay the eunuchs. Obviously, the lives of the people became increasingly more miserable. The people grew more and more discontent with the government until finally the Yellow Turban Rebellion broke out. It was led by a mysterious figure called Zhang Zu. In The Romance of Three Kingdoms, it's written that Zhang Zu was living a life of a farmer after failing the state examinations. One day, he met a man named Zhang Zu, and with his teachings, he became a Taoist master. He created a religion called the Way of Peace and traveled all over the country, gathering a large flock of followers. These followers were known as the Yellow Turbans, and they acted under the slogan, "The blue sky is already dead, and the yellow sky will rise." Some say that Zhang Zu had predicted the infamous yellow dust some 2,000 years ago. The Yellow Turbans' plan for revolt was found out, but they were already ready to revolt nationwide. And it seems to me that they had been preparing very carefully because there is a record that they exchanged letters with eunuchs to cooperate in attacking the capital, Luoyang. In 184, the Yellow Turban Rebellion broke out nationwide. It is recorded that the number of Yellow Turbans was around 1 million, but the figure seems to have been exaggerated. Most scholars agree that the actual number of Yellow Turbans ranged from about 300,000 to 400,000. Some believe that this rebellion is more important than the Three Kingdoms period itself because it contributed to the destruction of Han, which marked the beginning of a chaotic period that went on for 400 years. The Yellow Turbans started to plunder the whole country, and it seemed to devour the Han because it was such a huge uprising. When the capital Luang was about to be overwhelmed, the emperor felt a great sense of urgency, but most of the generals capable of commanding the army were either killed or imprisoned during the power struggle against the eunuchs. Thus, many officials and generals were pardoned by the government and asked to assemble troops to suppress the rebellion. Those who participated in the subjugation were Huang Fusong, Liu Ji, Zhu Jun, Dongju, Shao Shao, and Sun Jian. Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei also led 500 soldiers. The 70,000 imperial forces were at a numerical disadvantage against 400,000 Yellow Turbans, but it had the advantage of being a well-trained regular army as opposed to Yellow Turbans, who were mostly untrained farmers. And the generals who made the biggest contribution to the subjugation were Huang Fusong and Liu Ji, not Shao Shao or Liu Bei. Huang Fusong is frequently overlooked because he was active only at the early stages of the Three Kingdoms period. But he was an excellent general comparable to Zhang Han, who had tried to save the failing Qin dynasty. Huang Fusong, the last true general that Han dynasty could offer, played a huge role in defeating the Yellow Turbans. Liu Bei was a well-known scholar as well as a capable general, and it is recorded that he was about 194 centimeters tall. When Liu Bei was young, he studied under Liu Bei, but he did not have much interest in studying, and he skipped much of his classes. One of the students who skipped classes with Liu Bei was Gong Sun-jan. Liu Bei was fighting well against the Yellow Turbans, but when he refused to bribe a high-ranking official, he was fired and replaced by Dongju. However, when Dongju was defeated by the Yellow Turbans, Huang Fusong took over and wiped out the Yellow Turbans. Thanks to Huang Fusong and Liu Bei, the rebellion was suppressed in a relatively short time. Even though sporadic rebellions broke out after this, it was not enough to threaten the capital, Luoyang, anymore. During this period, however, the whole country was in chaos, and it was an opportunity for the regional warlords to establish their power base. And the warlords who made the full use of this confusion were Shao, Yun Shao, and Dongju. Shao was the grandchild of Shao Tang, who had wielded great power, as mentioned before. Therefore, it is said that he was arrogant from childhood. Shao became a captain of the capital guards at the age of 20, not because he was right for the job, but because he was appointed by orders from above. But he proved himself to be a capable officer. One of the relatives of Zhang Zu, who had been in power at the time, broke the night curfew, but Shao didn't care how powerful his relative was and beat him to death according to the law. But Shao could get away with it because his grandfather was Shao Tang, and he made a name for himself with this incident. At this time, it was fashionable to be evaluated by a famous person, and it was used as a letter of recommendation or resume. However, when Shao was a child, he did not receive a good evaluation because he was pretty spoiled as a child. But someone named Qiao Xuan gave a good evaluation of Qiao. Qiao Xuan encouraged Shao to go to a person named Xu Shao to get an evaluation. Xu Shao's assessment on Shao was something like this: "You are a competent vessel in times of peace, and a cunning hero if the world is in turmoil." It is said that Shao was very pleased to hear this. Although it is not well known, Shao was also a very talented scholar. Shao knew well enough to leave comments on military tactics, and he was also regarded as an excellent poet. But on the other hand, Shao had a cunning and cruel side to him in real life. One of Shao's friends was Yun Shao, who was from one of the most prestigious families of the time. Yuan Shao was popular among his peers and is said to have had good looks. But Yuan Shao was looked down on because his mother was a slave. Also, there's a suspicion that Yuan Shao's father wasn't his biological father, so his brother Yuan Shu even called him a house slave in his letters. To overcome this sense of inferiority, Yuan Shao does the unthinkable by going through a 6-year mourning period for his dead parents. At the time, it was customary to go through a 3-year mourning period, but it was so difficult that people sometimes died doing this. But Yuan Shao went through 2 mourning periods in a row, and it was such a big hit that there were even people who came to see the mourning. Yuan Shao's reputation grew day by day, and by the time the Yellow Turban Rebellion broke out, he became a key figure among government officials. The next person to be introduced is Tong Zhu, who is portrayed as a greedy and violent monster. However, in reality, Dongju was a respected warlord who successfully fought off barbarians from the north. When Dongju was young, a group of neighboring tribes visited his house as guests. Dongju served them meat by killing his only cow. The guests were impressed and sent a herd of cattle as a gift to Dongju. Also, considering the fact that Dongju's followers were known to be very loyal to him, I think that he was not just an ignorant villain as people might believe. Dongju was credited with many victories against the northern barbarians and eventually was assigned to lead an army against the Yellow Turbans. However, he made many tactical mistakes and was defeated by the rebels. His failed campaign was overshadowed by Huang Fusong's success against the rebels, and it must have been pretty agonizing for him to be compared to Huang Fusong. The government gave orders to Dongju to surrender his army to Huang Fusong, but he refused to do so, saying that his soldiers are too fond of him to follow anyone else's command. In the capital Luoyang, a bloodbath was about to take place. The man who was in power at the time was Empress He's brother, He Jin. He Jin was originally a butcher, but he had a fortune enough to pay bribes to the eunuchs. He Jin succeeded in making his sister a royal concubine of Emperor Ling by investing everything he had and bribing the eunuchs. Hejin's sister was tall and beautiful, so she got the attention of Emperor Ling and eventually became the empress. And with the support from his sister, Hejin became the general-in-chief. But after gaining power, Hejin started to distance himself from the eunuchs and ally himself with the officials who were in the power struggle with the eunuchs. And one of the officials that approached him was Shao. In 189, Emperor Ling died and his son Emperor Shao became the new emperor. Zhang Zu invited his political rival Hejin to his house and plans to assassinate him. However, Hejin could barely escape because one of his associates at the party informed him of the plan to kill him. After this incident, Hejin completely turned his back on the eunuchs and decided to eliminate them. But in order to do that, it was necessary to obtain permission from his sister Empress He. But she would not allow it since the eunuchs had already bribed her and gained her sympathy. You would think it would have been easy to eliminate the eunuchs because Hejin had the command of the imperial army. But he couldn't just ignore the authority of his sister, where his power rested. Yuan Shao came up with a plan for Hejin. At the time, there was a group of bandits called the Black Mountain Bandits, and they were said to have numbered over 1 million. Yuan Shao proposed to exaggerate their threat and declare a state of emergency and then summon warlords from all over the country to convene in Luoyang. Then they could convince the warlords to drive out the eunuchs and subjugate the Black Mountain Bandits afterward. Hejin agreed to this plan and started summoning warlords from nearby provinces, but the eunuchs eventually found out about this plan and decided to take the initiative. On the way to the palace, Hejin was assassinated by the eunuchs. After Hejin's death, Luoyang fell into chaos. Before the eunuchs could regain power, Yuan Shao stormed into the palace and started killing every eunuch he could find. And in this process, it is said that many people without beard were killed because they were mistaken for eunuchs. There were officials who had to take off their trousers to prove that they were not a eunuch. The total number of people who were killed on that day was about 2,000. The remaining eunuchs escaped Luoyang with the emperor, but realizing that there was no hope, they all jumped into the river and killed themselves. Emperor Shao and his brother, Liu Bei, was returning to the palace with a few retainers. They were met with Dongju, who later became known as a monster for his cruelty. When he met the emperor for the first time, he asked what had happened to them so far. But the emperor was so terrified that he couldn't answer him. Emperor Shao was 17 years old at the time, and he grew up in a Taoist shaman's house because Empress He believed in superstition when he was a child. So the emperor was lacking in court manners and didn't look so bright. Frustrated that the conversation was going nowhere, Dongju asked his younger brother, Liu Bei, instead. Although he was only 9 years old, he gave a much clearer version of what had happened. Liu Bei was not the son of Empress He, but the son of consort Wang. Empress He grew jealous of Wang when she heard that Wang was pregnant with the emperor's baby and tried to poison Wang, but failed. After a while, Wang was poisoned to death, but not before giving birth to Liu Bei. Empress Dong, who was the mother of Emperor Ling, raised Liu Bei herself. Dongju only had 3,000 soldiers with him when he entered Luoyang, but every night he would silently send out his soldiers out of the gate and made them come back in the morning with a loud noise. It seemed a lot of troops were gathering under his command. In addition, because Dongju was protecting the emperor, many soldiers who were under Hejin's command joined Dongju. Liu Bei also joined Dongju at this time. Liu Bei will be known as the strongest warrior in the Three Kingdoms period. There is a saying, Liu Bei the greatest among men and red hair among horses.